Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll just give folks one more second to pop on in. Alrighty. So we can get started, and folks can keep trickling on in as we go. But hello, welcome to the Morris-Jumel Mansion's virtual parlor chat. My name is Danielle. I'm the Public Programs and Visitor Services Manager at the mansion. And this month, the month of April, our virtual parlor chat is called How is an Exhibit Made? So we'll do a lot of learning about that. But before we jump in, just to give folks a little bit of background on the mansion, the Morris-Jumel Mansion was built in 1765. It is the oldest remaining house in Manhattan. We are 260 years young this year. The house is 260 years young, and we're celebrating that very important anniversary. It was built on the ancestral land of the Lenape people and was likely built, ran, and funded using enslaved labor. It was also used as George Washington's headquarters in 1776. And then it later housed Eliza Jamel, former Vice President Aaron Burr, and Ann Northup. And then just some housekeeping. We have some updates for you. On May 3rd at 1 and 3 p.m., we will be hosting a walking tour in partnership with the organization While We Are Still Here. And that is going to be about Harlem Renaissance legacies in Sugar Hill. We'll go around the neighborhood, see some of the wonderful purple signs that folks have been putting up from the organization While We Are Still Here, commemorating the residences of luminaries from the Harlem Renaissance. And that is going to be as part of the Harlem Culture Crawl. So it's free. You could head to Eventbrite to get tickets for that. And then on May 10th, we have Family and Community Day. And then on May 21st, you can meet us right back here for another virtual parlor chat. Another fun update is that our summer hours begin May 27th, 2025. So unlike during the colder months, we will be open after Memorial Day from 1 to 4 p.m. on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So that is quite exciting. We're ready for the warm weather to get here and stay here. And now, before we hop into things, we'll talk a little bit about what the virtual parlor chat is, and how we're going to go about the conversation aspect of tonight. So to submit questions, we ask that you use the Q&A feature on the webinar. And we will read those out at the end of Caroline's presentation. And she will be answering those. I'll be sort of the voice of the audience member, and she'll be answering me and you, and you'll get to have a conversation with her in that way. And so before we hop in, I would love to introduce the wonderful and amazing Caroline. She is our school and community programs manager. And she also has an MA in exhibit and experience design from FIT. And so I'll read her bio for you all before I keep going on and on and on about how wonderful she is. And then I'll turn it over to her. So all about Caroline Siavichay. Caroline is a museum professional who is passionate about the museum, the way museum education can serve our communities. Previously, she worked in the exhibitions department of the National Museum of the American Indian while earning her master's degree in exhibition and experience design from the Fashion Institute of Technology. While at FIT, she was the recipient of the Designing for Empathy Award from One Network. Before that, Caroline was a lead classroom educator for 6+ years and has had the privilege of teaching not only in NYC, but in elementary schools in Hanoi, Vietnam, and Almeria, Spain. She also holds a BFA in theater performance from Virginia Commonwealth University and has worked professionally as an actor, director, and co-founder of a small theater company in both Richmond, Virginia, and Dublin, Ireland. Caroline has a passion for historic sites and loves working in a place that has such incredible stories to tell. And so now I will turn it over to Caroline, who will talk to us a little bit about how an exhibit in a museum comes to be.
Hi, thank you so much, Danielle. Danielle's wonderful too. I'd love to get a chance to read her bio on here one day. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to go ahead and pull my slideshow up for us. Everybody should be able to see this. Danielle, you can hop on the mic and tell me if anyone has trouble viewing. But tonight we're going to talk about, looks good, fantastic. So tonight we're going to talk about how an exhibit gets made. It's an incredibly interesting part of the museum world and the museum process. And we're going to do a basic overview of the steps, how an exhibit gets made. I'll get to show you a little bit of work I've done in the past. And at the end, as a special treat for coming in tonight, we're going to give you guys just a little bit of a sneak peek into our very special 260th anniversary exhibit. Not too much of a sneak peek, of course. We don't want to give away any of the big heavy hitters. But let's get into the process of how an exhibit is made. So the first thing I'd like to highlight here is that exhibits and the museum world in general is always a team effort. You know, no one is an island. It always takes a team of many qualified people working together, helping each other see all viewpoints of the situation. It takes a lot of research, a lot of hands-on work, and you know, having those positive relationships and that great teamwork is absolutely essential within the building and within the museum. So the first thing we need for any exhibit is we always need our big idea. This is kind of like the big bang of an exhibit. You know, where does it all come from? Our big idea is going to be our central message that ties the whole exhibit together. It's that main takeaway that you want people to walk out of that exhibit with. What do you want them to understand? What do you want them to feel? Or what do you want them to even question by coming to that exhibit? So the big idea is, again, a very collaborative effort. This is where the museum team, like the curators, designers, educators, you know, sometimes even specialized community members with, you know, certain areas of knowledge are pulled in. And we want to talk about three main things. We want to talk about what story are we telling? Who is it for? And why does it matter now? So you'll see on the left, I have an example for you of a big idea. This was from a sponsored project that I did while at FIT. It was a sponsored project for the National Museum of the American Indian. This was the exhibit that actually won that award that Danielle mentioned from One Network. And the big idea behind that exhibit was food sovereignty is a right and a cultural necessity for the Haudenosaunee people in the face of multiple atrocities related to the loss of food sovereignty, including land displacement, loss of autonomy, and disruption of their health and well-being. The Haudenosaunee have responded with interminable resilience and hope. So this was the big main takeaway that I wanted everyone to walk away from that exhibit knowing that food sovereignty is a right. A lot of terrible things have happened to the Haudenosaunee people, but they always respond with resilience and with hope. And, you know, again, this big idea statement was a very collaborative effort. I was lucky enough to put together many interviews with people from the Braiding the Sacred organization, from the different activist groups for Native and Indigenous food sovereignty. I was able to speak with a lot of people who worked in Indigenous and Native museums, not only in New York, but in DC and outside other organizations. And this project was one that really highlighted for me that need to collaborate on your big idea, because you can think that you know what's important or what you want people to walk away from, but inherently we are all beautifully different, wonderful, unique people, and it's so helpful to have all of those different viewpoints and um, pockets of specialized knowledge put together to come up with what is essential for people to walk away from this exhibit knowing or thinking or feeling. So we have that big idea. And from there, we can start to break down into our content areas for an exhibit. What are the central themes we're going to talk about underneath the umbrella of this big idea? What different content areas are we going to tell these different narratives in that weave together into the one big narrative of our big idea? So for this exhibition, I actually used a fun little exercise that I learned getting my graduate degree at FIT called card sorting, where you write down everything related to your topic and your big idea that you can think of, and you spread them all out on, much to my husband's displeasure, all over your living room floor or all over all your tables at work, that even if other people are using them. And you look at all the words and you see where central themes are starting to pop out. Now, there's a million different ways you can determine content areas. That's just an example of one, fun exercise that you can do. But for this specific exhibit, I broke it down into three main content areas. I wanted to talk about what I'm calling the Creator's Creed, which reflects Native and Indigenous views and practices related to food, and is intended to be a celebration of the techniques, the tools, the traditions, that communal effort of sharing and growing food together. We wanted to touch on, of course, the section I'm calling Hunger and Pain, where we talked about the land displacement, the loss of autonomy, all of these things that have made food sovereignty such an issue for Native and Indigenous communities. And then we brought it back with our Seeds of Resilience, where we talked about education, policy reform, the food sovereignty organization leaders, and all of this amazing, wonderful communal work that's being done. So even though we are educating people on the difficult things that have happened, overall, the exhibit is weaving this narrative of interminable hope and resilience and a celebration of Haudenosaunee culture. So this is just a look at how once you have that big idea, you can start breaking it down into smaller content areas. Now, once you have your story, you have your narrative, you have your big idea, you have your content areas, you have a cohesive narrative that wraps them all together, we're going to move into our research and collecting phase. So this is when we're going to start to think about what is going into this exhibit. What are we showing? What helps us tell this narrative that we have decided is so important to tell? So we're going to research our objects, our documents, photos, oral histories, if you're lucky enough to have an oral history collection. And again, everything is collaborative within the museum. We collaborate with experts, with historians, again, with community members who have specialized knowledge. And you start to put together what's called an artifact schedule to determine what's going to be shown in that exhibit. And a lot of museums, some people are surprised to learn, when they're putting together an exhibit, they don't just use the items that they have in their collection. Sometimes there's borrowing from other institutions, or one of my favorite things, sometimes there's co-creation with the community and sourcing items from there. But you're kind of finding the objects and the physicality to tell that narrative that you've decided you want to tell. You have your story, and now you're helping it take shape with the items that inherently have that narrative kind of written into their bones. Now comes the creative part. Next, we're going to start designing that experience. We have our big idea, we have our story and our narrative. We know what objects are going to help us tell that along the way. So now we need to decide, what's that experience going to look like? What is it going to feel like? How are we going to engage people? How do we want to present these items? How are these items going to tell this story? And how can we show that in a way people can see? So we want to start thinking about, how is this space going to feel? How do we want it to feel? And another fun tool that you can use in exhibit design is an emotion map, which you'll see on the top here. This is an emotion map I made for that exhibit for the Indigenous food sovereignty. And I graded the scales, the colors on sort of intensity of emotion. And this is really helpful because you can be very intentional about the emotional journey that you're taking people on and how you want to present this narrative and this story that you've decided on. For example, if you look at this map, you'll notice those red areas are areas of more intense emotion. And they've purposely been put in areas that you have a choice whether you go into those areas or not. They're not part of the gallery flow that you have to access. They're separate rooms that you can choose whether to access or not because of the content of that specific narrative about Indigenous food sovereignty. There are a lot of intense feelings and intense, tragedies that have happened because of it. And there may be people, who are Native and Indigenous visiting the museum who they're living that story. They don't need to see more of it. They might choose to skip that. Or there might be just certain people who may feel triggered by that because of what they've experienced in their life, and they can choose to skip that as well. So having an emotion map can be an incredibly useful tool for the journey that you want to guide people through. Now, we also want to start thinking, not just about how the space feels and how we want people to feel as they're walking through, but we want to start thinking about colors, lights, sounds, the visual aspects that contribute to those feelings and that also help communicate our message and communicate our narrative. And a fun tool I like to use for that is putting together mood boards for our different content areas, our different pieces of our narrative that we want to tell. So you'll see here I had a mood board and color palette and material choices for each of those big three main content areas of the narrative. And those color choices were influenced by natural textures and food choices and colors that were specifically important to the Haudenosaunee culture and community. And not only that, but they also coincided with, again, how we want people to feel in each space, how they communicate that narrative. And of course, you also want to start thinking about the placement of these objects and these artifacts. Where should they go in order to help tell this story the best? And this is really where our sketching and our 3D modeling comes into play. At the bottom, you can see a couple renderings I did with 3D modeling softwares and Adobe Creative Suites that kind of shows placement of certain interactives within the exhibit, and the scale as well is an important thing to think about. For example, this video interactive bowl and spoon you can see at the bottom, which was inspired by a Haudenosaunee proverb of the dish with one spoon. And the scale of that was really important to figure out and get right. You want it to be at a proper height that visitors of all ages and all accessibilities can interact with and use. You want it to be able to be at the correct height for everyone. You want to see how it's going to look in the gallery. How much space is it going to take up? Is it contributing to that narrative? Is it contributing to that feeling we want everyone to feel, or is it taking away from it? So visualizing things in the space and getting it down either on paper or on a 3D software is really important for the process. Now, also, a lot of people tend to think that exhibits and exhibit design and museum work is very creative and it's very fun, but it's also very technical. I just described using the 3D modeling software and getting renderings together. You also have to have very exact floor plans and spacing models. This is actually a little sneak peek. They've changed the floor plan a little bit since then. I changed the floor plan a little bit since this model. This was a very early preliminary version of a floor plan for an exhibit that's going to be opening at NMAI down at Bowling Green this October, actually. It's called Clearly Indigenous. It's glasswork from Native and Indigenous artists, and there's also a case from Dale Chihuly there. So that's actually going to be a really great show that I worked on designing that I recommend everyone go see in October. Just a little plug, and just to give you a sense of the technical aspects involved in exhibit design. And again, here you can see everything has to be very precise, and you need to have all your measurements laid out. Everyone at the museum, I'm sure, has been, you know, giggling at me lately because while we're working on this exhibit, I'm always saying, what are the dimensions? What are the dimensions? I need the dimensions. Because you want to make sure that you get everything right, especially when you're working with fabricators who are building things for you. If they're building casework, if they're building, um, wall extensions, if they're building partitions, or for graphics and signage, you need everything to be precise and everything to be well measured. So these are actually examples from my graduate thesis that I presented a few years ago. And you can see we needed precise measurements and detailing for all of our content graphics and our wall additions. And on the right, you can see a graphic location plan. So this is every little color you see on that map is a graphic treatment that's needed for the exhibit. So everything is precisely laid out. It's color coded. It also has a number attached to it that would match a graphic schedule that has a list of every graphic and its location within the exhibit. So the exhibit design process is very fun and it is very creative, but it's also very exact dimensions, exact placements, a lot of lists, a lot of schedules. Something else that is really often done is doing what's called a reflected ceiling plan, where it's like a bird's eye view looking down at your ceiling, and you'll map out where all of your lighting is going, where all of your power sources are, where all of your AV is. And it's things like that that really make the process work. It's kind of the nitty gritty behind the scenes of the magic that makes it feel seamless and effortless and magical to visitors. Now, our next step, we have our story, we have our objects, we know where everything's going and what color it is and how everything's going to look and where it's going to be. Now we need to write our text. And I cannot say it enough that words matter. Exhibit text has to be clear and it has to be really engaging. Of course, we want to talk about what the objects are, why they're important, how they connect to our big idea and our bigger story. But they also need to be engaging to visitors. They need to hook them in. We always say in the museum business, there are 3 types of visitors. You have your streakers who just go right through the exhibit and they only get the biggest, most flashiest, shortest text pieces. We have strollers who are just kind of walking along. Maybe they'll read some things here and some things there. And we have our studiers who sit and read every single panel we put out. And we love the studiers because we put so much work into the panels. So we love to have them read. But it's important to address all 3 types of visitors in your text panels. You want to have something for the streakers, big pull quotes, big ideas that they'll see as they streak by. You want to have a little bit more information, a little bit more engagement, something participatory for your strollers and for your studiers. And for everyone, you need that hook. So we want to hook them, we want to engage them, and we want them to participate. Now, this sign here that says, how long ago is 66 million years? This is a great example of a participatory sign because it tells you, try this, open and close your hands quickly. Each time you do it represents 1 year. Now, picture doing this for 24/7 for 2 years. That's how long you'd have to flash your hands to represent 66 million years. So we're drawing our visitors in, we're giving them something to do and participate, and we're kind of hooking them along to continue through the exhibit. So text is incredibly, incredibly important in communicating our message and getting visitors to participate and see themselves within the exhibit. Step 5, prototyping. Prototyping is very, very fun. It's also where the line between fun and frustration might get a little blurred because it's something that's incredibly important. And it also is something that causes a lot of changes to be made. So prototyping is great fun and gives a lot of important information. It helps us see what's working and what's not. It reveals how visitors actually interact with something, because we can think people are going to do things all we want in our minds, but the way they actually go and interact with it might be very different from the way that we think they will. It also saves us time and money by catching problems early. If you print out all your graphics without prototyping, suddenly they arrive and you realize, the contrast isn't high enough, the text is not big enough, one of the images got blurred. These are all things that you can save yourself a ton of time and money by just printing it out on paper and taping it up to the wall first. And prototyping also lets us get feedback, which is great. And there's a lot of ways to do prototyping. The way that I was initially taught and that I think is the most successful is to just use things you already have. Use things around your house, uh, toilet paper tubes, paper, pencils, paper clips, things like this can be incredibly effective. And I have a couple of really cool examples of prototyping here. I have a video up here on the top left that I'll play for us, which is when I was working on that Clearly Indigenous, the glasswork exhibit at NMAI. It's a traveling exhibit, and it's going to be coming to us from another museum across the country. And it's traveling with casework. So at NMAI, it is a historic building. It's an old customs house, and they don't have a large freight elevator. They only have a teeny tiny elevator. So the cases were pretty big, and we had to see, are these cases going to fit in this elevator to load this exhibit into the museum or not? So I cut out a piece of paper with the dimensions of the case, and this is a view of myself and Jerry Breen from NMAI trying to see if the cases will fit in the elevator. So as you can see, the cases did not fit in that tiny elevator, which was great to know because we got in contact with the original fabricators and they ended up making some adjustments to the cases and refabricating them so that they would be much easier for us to load in as well as the other museums that it's traveling to. So that was a really important piece of prototyping we did. You can see also here on the top right, that's a project I did for the Central Park Zoo, testing out some graphics, which totally changed after I did this prototyping. On the bottom, you can see some prototyping from when I was a graduate student at FIT. On the bottom left was a fun little wishing tree interactive where people would write their wishes and hang it on the tree. And as you can see, it's very simple. It's just cut out paper and markers. And one of my favorites on the bottom right there, that was for a project we did, a sponsored project for Fortnite. And this was a prototype a friend of mine did where she had an interactive where you were kind of, hunting another player, and they have a banana character that she was very inspired by. So she had the banana guns and the banana VR mask. And it was a really fun day to do. So prototyping is incredibly important, can be incredibly fun, and it can save you a ton of time and money. So we love prototyping. We always, always, always prototype. So now we've done our prototyping. Everything is how we want it to. We've made our adjustments. Everything's perfect. It's time for the build and install. So this is if you're having cases or walls or partitions built, now we build them. If we need specialized mounts for objects, we make sure that we either build them or have them. We make sure we have everything we need to ensure that objects are protected. We check our light levels in the exhibit halls. We make sure that everything, that the objects are safe and well cared for. If we have interactives or lights or media, this is when they're set up and programmed and installed. And everything has to be double checked for safety, for accessibility, and for accuracy. So build and install can also be a very stressful, very busy time, but it's also very exciting because this is when you're seeing this vision and this story that you've been building actually come to life and come together right in front of your eyes. And this is also a time when precision does matter. It's very important to have all your measurements right, have clear communication with your vendors, with your fabricators, make sure everybody's on the same page so that the vision comes to life accurately and safely. And that's a photo of myself and Susanna from NMAI on the day we were installing the new wayfinding at NMAI. So now everything's installed. We're ready. We're open to the public. Open day's finally here. Visitors come in, they explore, they say, wow, they say, ooh, they say, ah, they love it. You feel so great. Um, and a lot of people think that that's where it kind of ends with museum exhibits. But in my opinion, best practice is for it not to end there. It's really important to do um, an evaluation of the exhibit post opening. It's really important to gather feedback and to see what people are responding to, what they're not, how people are interacting with the exhibit, how can it be tweaked, how can it be improved, and what do we know now for next time for the exhibit. So it's always really important to keep gathering that feedback after you open. Now, you might be asking yourself, why does this all matter? Why do exhibits and museums matter at all? Um, I personally think they are one of the cornerstones of cultural heritage. They're preserving and sharing stories, which humans have been doing since the beginning of time. Since all we had were oral histories passed down from person to person and generation to generation, stories are inherently and integrally human, and museums help us keep that part of our humanity alive. They also spark curiosity. You might wonder about things you've never wondered about before. It helps you reflect on the past, learn things you never knew before, see yourself in places and subjects that you never imagined you could see yourself in or relate to. And it helps you imagine new futures, which for me is particularly precious and relevant. I grew up just outside DC in single parent, low income family, and the free museums in DC were quite literally life changing for me. They opened up a whole new path. They made me curious about other cultures, about other time periods, and because of that access to museums and to exhibits and the wonderful things that I saw there, I'm sitting before you all today as a well-read, well-traveled, well-educated woman who loves museums and who loves exhibits. And I credit museums for that entirely. So as promised, we'll give you a very quick little sneak peek into our 260th anniversary exhibit, What the House Saw, 260 Years of Stories from the Morris-Jumel Mansion. A little snippet of our big idea is that for 260 years, the Morris-Jumel Mansion has stood as a witness to pivotal moments in history, from the American Revolution to New York City's emergence as a global metropolis. So we're going to invite everybody into the mansion to see these huge pivotal moments and eras in history from the perspective of the mansion. It's an incredible story, really, to be told. And again, as we talked about earlier, we've divided that big idea down into different content areas and different narratives we want to tell. And we're doing it by time period, by era in the mansion. And you can see on the left, each era has a theme to it. For example, in the Victorian era, we're going to talk about one of our principal figures, Eliza Jumel. And our theme there is a woman's house in a man's world, because she was a powerful woman in a man's world indeed. Our research and collecting. I mentioned sometimes museums don't just use their collections. We're very fortunate to have an incredible collection at MJM that we really are looking forward to showcasing, but we also have a really incredible community. So we've put out into the community a call for artifacts. We're going to be co-creating this with members of the community, and we've already had some incredible offers from community members. We're really excited to have some artifacts from Larry Neal, who was a leader of the Black Arts movement. We have a record that was signed by Maya Angelou, a Langston Hughes letter. So many people have come forward with incredible things. And my personal philosophy is that museums should be in service to their communities and not the other way around. So I am just so excited and so grateful to partner with all these amazing people we have living right around the mansion. and for the community to kind of see themselves reflected in, the hallways and the walls of the house. I'm very excited for that, and I think it's going to be great. In our design process, I'm not going to give you too much away because we want everyone to come and see it. We don't want to give away any big surprises, but this is just a look into how involved the design process can be. On the far left, we have a visitor flow map because we're always thinking about audience and experience and how we want it to flow for everyone. And on the right, you can see a couple different iterations of floor plans. You can see my notes and my measurements, my dimensions written all over it because I'm always saying, what are the dimensions? What are the dimensions? Because accuracy matters. So just a quick look into the technical aspects here. And thank you guys so much for your time. Thank you for listening. And I'm really excited to share the 260 years of stories from the Morris-Jumel Mansion because Lord knows it has some of the greatest ones. So thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
All righty. Thank you, Caroline. So now we'll start with the Q&A portion. I know we already have some in the feature already. So I'll go ahead and read those out, but make sure you pop your questions into the Q&A feature if you have any. So the first question is, how does exhibit venue as opposed to exhibit subject impact exhibit design?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So a lot of times the site of the exhibit, you have to figure out how it connects to your subject. For example, if you have a very long, linear, thin exhibit, that's going to impact the way that you organize that narrative and that story. Or if you have a space that's very wide and very round, that's also going to impact the way that you tell that story and that narrative. So it doesn't necessarily, I would say, like change your big idea or your narrative, but it impacts the way that you visually tell that story and how is it going to make sense for visitors to get from one thought to the next in the shape and size of the space that you have to work with.
Awesome. And then the next question that we have is, how does the contemporary approach to exhibit design differ from the approach to exhibit design from 25 years ago, 50 years ago, etc.?
I love this question. So, first of all, the concept of exhibit design and exhibit designers is fairly new. It's only been within the last, 20 to 40 years that people have really started recognizing this as a separate part of museums. And so the origin of museums, if anyone knows or doesn't know, they came from curio cabinets, which were these like highly personal, specialized collections that people would have. Mostly wealthy people of means would collect really interesting, cool items that not everybody could have. And then they'd invite everybody and show off their big collections. And so that kind of progressed into, museums coming to be. And because of that, the style of museums originally was very everything kind of packed in, as much packed in as they could. If you look at museums from when they first started and first opened, it's like these gallery walls that have paintings hung from the floor to the ceiling. Everything's packed in. And then moving towards the modern day and contemporary, we've really kind of taken on a white box model. It's kind of like we've gone so far in the opposite direction. Everything's clean, it's modern, it's minimal. It's the white box. It's what it's called, the white box model. Like if you walk into any, for example, art gallery, you'll just see a white box with paintings on it. Everything clean, minimal, But personally, I'm starting to see a shift in the way museums are designing into more audience focused, more user focused, more interactives. So they're focusing now kind of on creating environments for people to be in, not just like galleries to showcase their objects or whatever they have. They're focusing on creating immersive environments. So that's where I see it going lately and next.
Awesome. So one question that I think is super important, and I'd love for you to share, is what do you think the most important aspect of exhibit and experience design is? So out of all the things that you've
Mhm,
talked about today, or maybe even something that we haven't even gotten to touch on, what do you think
mhm.
is that key aspect?
I think there might be some people in the industry who have different opinions about this, but for me, I think audience experience should always be top of mind. Museums are for people, they're for communities. Exhibits are for people, they're for communities. And so keeping the experience that they're going to have as they go through it and, looking at it from their point of view and in their shoes, I think is for me always key and top of mind.
Amazing. And then this is a fun question. What is your favorite object that you are putting in the 260th exhibition? I love that question.
Oh, don't make me choose. There's so maybe I'll do 2. I'll do one that the community is loaning us and then one that we have in our collection. So, from the ones that the community is loaning us, it has to be a tie,
Okay.
unfortunately, between, the letter from Langston Hughes that Karen Taylor is being kind enough to loan us and, um, the record of Maya Angelou poetry that she signed and inscribed to Larry and Evelyn Neal that their son Avatar is being kind enough to loan us. They're just both incredibly personal and, seeing the handwriting is always so
Mhm.
evocative and human. And my favorite object from our collections that we're putting in, oh, I know it has to be we have a set of ladies garters that are going in our Victorian era section, and they're hand embroidered. They say "Amor y Gloria," and they're feminine and they're powerful and they're kind of unexpected. And I've been obsessed with them ever since we first discovered them in the collection. So that would be my favorite one. But we have so many good things. We have so many
We
good
do.
things. That's just,
It's really hard to narrow it down.
I
Um,
know. Can I take a guess what yours is, Danielle?
yes,
Eliza Jumel's pin dish.
it is. You got me there. I
Mhm.
maybe it was the
There's
fact that I was obsessing over it just this morning that led you to that one. It
and
is gorgeous. I will point it out to anyone and everyone who walks by it in the exhibit when it opens. It's the best.
mhm, and there's a
Um,
really fun story that goes with it,
it
and you'll have to
does.
come see the exhibit to know what that story is.
Does. This is a great follow-up question to that. Were there any surprises or unexpected discoveries as you worked on the 260th anniversary exhibit? So I guess while we were in the collections, kind of crawling around in there.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. A lot of fun discoveries that, me personally, I did not know were there. I've been at the mansion, just coming up on a year, and so there's a lot of things I haven't gotten into yet. Collections or archives wise. One that I think you actually found, Danielle, that was so cool was an original land grant from King George III, granting an American
Yes.
colonist a portion of land, and it's printed on animal vellum, um, which is held up surprisingly well. That was
It's in
crazy cool.
gorgeous condition.
Great condition. That was a really exciting find. Was that the question? Any surprises or unexpected
Yeah,
things?
I
Yeah.
feel like for us too, we are both kind of just coming up on a year of working at the mansion. So this has been
Mhm.
our opportunity to roll up our sleeves. So it's all been kind of amazing to see some of these things for the first time. Um,
Yeah. And I mean, everything the community has contributed and has been gracious enough to loan us have been just the sweetest, richest, most wonderful surprises.
that's
Like, we
true.
truly have the best neighbors. We do.
Yeah, that is very, very true. Um, so then another question that we had is what kind of objects are interactive? What would kind of classify an interactive
Mhm.
in an exhibit?
Sure. So interactives can be a lot of different things. You can have analog interactives, which would be things like touch objects, things that are okay to touch, things that are okay to pick up. And You can engage a lot of different senses with interactive objects. You can have scent, you can have audio. Like, for example, if you scan a QR code and hear and listen to something, maybe a sneak peek at the exhibit. Um, so anything you can touch, you can smell, you can listen to. Also, we're in a big age of digital interactives. Anything with, a kiosk or an iPad or a screen that you tap and touch and move. They've got great like tabletop digital interactives. For example, at NMAI, there's a resource trading game that's on a digital tabletop, or at the Natural History Museum and the Gilder Center, they have a lot of digital interactives where you can see different insects up close and zoom in and look at them, or you can see photos people have uploaded to the internet of insects in New York, and you can see where in the city the insects were found. It lights up on a map. Anything that you're kind of like doing something and it has a reaction, or you can touch or feel or interact with your senses, would be an interactive. Or another one we had at NMAI was a kayak that you can sit in and try your best to balance on, and it shows you how well you're doing on your balancing. Or there's something you can look in that kind of mimics the way your vision changes when there's glare on snow. It's anything that you're, giving and receiving, giving stimulation, receiving stimulation is our interactives.
Awesome. And so we have two questions that are kind of the same.
Mhm.
What in this exhibition, or at MJM do you want to pursue that are interactives?
Mhm. So if for the 260th anniversary, we're really hoping to activate as many senses as possible. We do have a few touch objects that are deaccessioned and approved for touching, educational items that people can pick up and hold and feel, that will be properly secured so no one walks off with them. Um, we are hopefully going to have a scent interactive as well, where you can pick up and smell different scents that would have been in the house in the Victorian era. So you can kind of get an idea of what it smelled like. And we're working on, with the help of our good friend Charlie Owens, working on putting together some dramatic readings of primary sources that we have at the mansion, and really helping these, paper items of, journals and diaries kind of pop off the page and come to life, that you can scan a QR code and listen on your phone to these dramatic first person readings. So we're really hoping to activate as many senses as possible. We also have a 3D printed topographic map of the original boundaries of the land that the mansion sat on. Now it's just in a small 1 acre park, but it used to take up most of Upper Manhattan. And we have a 3D printed topographic map that people can touch and feel and see the differences in height and elevation and just how large that property was.
Awesome. It's all very, very exciting. And so this question, if you work on an exhibit and it opens to the public, and you see that the audience isn't directly connecting to it, or is maybe not interacting with it in the way that you thought they would, do you
Mhm.
ever tweak an exhibit after it opens? Is that something that an exhibit designer does?
It's something that an exhibit designer should do, but I think there are some things it's possible to tweak after opening, and there are some things that it's not. For example, you only have your budget only goes so far. If you're looking at something as reprinting, a major, vinyl graphic or something, then that might not be possible. And it might be something to note for next time. But if there's something, for example, in your interactives that they're not responding to, it might be possible to tweak or change that. Or if there's something in the composition of the display in the cases that you can kind of tell and see people are not receiving from it what you were hoping they would, or they're not picking up on the message you were hoping that they would, that those are things that can be tweaked and can be changed. So some things yes and some things no.
Awesome. So we're just about to wrap up. So I'll give anybody who has a last minute buzzer beater question, for Caroline, a second to do that. But I just wanted to thank you, Caroline, for coming on here tonight. to kick off your weekend with a virtual parlor chat. And this is very exciting. Oh wait, it's actually only Wednesday. I did that again, folks. I have
I
been
know,
doing
so I
that
got one
all
more
week.
day.
It's Thursday. Thursday is when your weekend starts. Um,
Mm.
but I think that we are just about to wrap up. So I'll just give one more second. And if you have any closing things that you want to add, Caroline.
No, I just really appreciate everyone being here, or if you're watching this at a later date on YouTube, I appreciate you looking it up. And exhibits are wonderful, exhibits are magic, and it takes a village, it takes a team to get them up. And when it works together and there's a synchrony and harmony and trust among a team, it just sings and it makes something truly magical.
Alrighty. So, um, oh, we have one more question. And then we will wrap up. What would you like to pursue as an immersive experience for MJM?
Oh my goodness. Um, there are so many ways and directions you can go with that, both analog and digital. It would be great to incorporate, some permanent sensory additions to the mansion to really put people into the story. It would be great to incorporate, sound and scent more into what we're doing there. But there's also a lot of digital things that would be so great to do. AR has come a really long way, and there's a lot we can do to bring some of the stories of the mansion to life using that technology. Once I totally wrap my head around how to use AR, but there's a lot of great things you can do, digitally and analog.
That's awesome. And so if nobody else has any more questions for this evening, that will wrap us up. I wanted to thank everyone for coming out to our virtual parlor chat this evening. Thank you again, Caroline. And if you are in the Upper Manhattan area or you're making a plan to be in the Upper Manhattan area, please come see our 260th anniversary exhibition, designed by the lovely Caroline, and our crew at the mansion who's worked so hard to get it together. We have a gorgeous, gorgeous house for you to explore as well. And it is a local and national landmark building, and it's a really important aspect of the US history. And so with all that being said, come on down June 14th for the opening for our new special exhibition, see the house, and come be a part of the history. Thank you so much, folks, and have a great evening.
Bye. Thank you.